Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another music talk. And for tonight, um, first of all, I want to say thank you to everyone who have been supporting the music talk, who have been like sharing and listening to all of them. I really appreciate that. And this is my first actually music talk in English, which is quite fun. And for that, I have a special guest tonight, uh, Mr. Zach Broch, who is um, one of the, I would say, one of the greatest violin player I ever met. And and I have the pleasure to meet him here at the University of Arkansas when he was touring with a great pianist too, actually, who I'm forgetting the name right now, Phil Markowitz,
Yeah.
and man, they can play and they know a lot of important stuff of our market, which is important for us, right? And and I'm more than welcome to have you here um, today, Zach. Thank you for coming and accepting to share with us all your experience with music.
Thanks for having me, Gustavo. I really appreciate it.
And in that regards, I will read a short bio I found of you. So so it says that critically acclaimed as the preeminent improvising violin of his generation. Zach Broch is an American jazz violin and a Grammy Award-winning member of the Snarky Puppy. He has toured with Stanley Clarke and Phil Markowitz, released 7 albums, and was named Rising Star Violins in 2013 by Downbeat magazine. A passionate educator, Zach has coached hundreds of musicians from workshops to conservatories worldwide. Zach remains a perennial coffee fanatic and a skateboard enthusiast, and currently lives with his wife and daughters in the New York area.
Yes.
Welcome again.
Thank you.
That's your short bio, and
That's
for
it.
sure I've been doing my research, and I realized that you are from Kentucky, from
Originally, yeah.
yeah, from Lexington, right?
That's right.
And then you early beginning was around the age of 4, and you start as a classical violinist with some roots into folk music, which lead you somehow into improvising. But can you tell us a little bit more, really briefly, so we get into the real stuff afterwards?
Yeah. Yeah. I started playing the violin at a young age with the Suzuki method, and part of that method is starting really young. You actually start even before you're big enough to hold an instrument. I think the first instrument I had for the first year or 6 months or whatever was a cigar box with a ruler
Uh-huh.
glued on it, just to learn how to kind of not break it, I guess.
Uh-huh.
And I got, but Suzuki violin, the Suzuki method is very much also aligned, even though it originated in Japan with Shinichi Suzuki. The music that it uses and it teaches is basically Western classical music,
Mm-hmm.
Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms,
Mm-hmm.
you know, with some folk melodies. And you learn by ear for the whole first part of when you're learning before you learn how to read music. So I
Mm-hmm.
started when I was 4, but I don't think that I really started uh, learning notation so much until I was probably 6 or 7.
Okay.
And so it's an emphasis on hearing and kind of mimicking your teacher. So it's based on the way that we um, pick up language,
Mm-hmm.
from our mother, the mother tongue approach.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that when I got into improvising, that was just my parents are both musicians, and I played. I would play little concerts with my family, and um, learn stuff by ear. And then I was playing more folk music, like American folk music or English folk. My dad was like really into like Scottish and Irish and English folk music, and a little bit of some Spanish folk music. My
Mm-hmm.
dad knew a few songs in Spanish, and you know, so that's how my improvisation started, was sort of learning these melodies and then messing around, having the freedom to mess around.
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
awesome. And then, at what point did you do the switch per se into the jazz world? You know.
I don't even know if I have yet.
Okay, that's a great answer.
No, that's no. I actually probably when I really made the switch. When I went to school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do exactly.
Okay.
I loved jazz. I loved improvisation. I loved classical music. I loved the violin.
Mm-hmm.
Really the great tradition of the violin is Western classical music. That's the canon of just this. That's not to say that there's not amazing violin playing and amazing things that have been in the violin with other stuff, but you know the Bach Chaconne, the Tchaikovsky Concerto, and all that stuff. I love it, and it's a way for me to. It's where I come from.
Mm-hmm.
It's where I
Mm-hmm.
come from. So my explorations on the instrument and my growth on that is helped by that. It's taken me a long time to figure out how to live with the two influences, because the way that you practice violin as a classical musician, or as any instrument as a classical musician,
Mm-hmm.
it's a different part of the brain than what you use to be an improviser, and especially a
Mm-hmm.
jazz
Mm-hmm.
improviser.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, Before we go all the way there, because I was actually thinking to go there.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back in time. So you were just started at an early age playing violin. Then you went to high school like a normal kid, or were you already exposed in orchestras and stuff like that, or it wasn't until later? What were you doing at that like age?
Well, when I was in high school, I was the concert master of the youth orchestra in Lexington. I think my senior year, and but I was also skateboarding
Ooh,
and playing the guitar,
okay.
and I was playing gigs with my dad. My dad's a trumpet player, so I was that's really kind of the main. I didn't know what I was doing. Even I got to even a certain level of ability with jazz improvisation and in playing, the repertoire, not in any type of formal study, but really in a folk way. In that
Mm-hmm.
I was going to gigs and screwing up, and then like the older musicians that were, playing with my dad would either cheer me on, or they would help me out
Bring
in some
it.
club, and say like, hey, maybe you need to check out, this, do you know what to do on this or whatever. There weren't a lot of formal conversations around that, but just getting a chance to do it on a regular basis in a
Mm-hmm.
low stakes environment, like we were
Uh-huh.
playing at a restaurant. So
Mm-hmm.
if I screw up the changes on all the things you are, you
Who?
know,
Hopefully,
the
no
only
one was
person who cares
recording.
is really it's like me and the band, not
Yeah.
the person eating the $20 steak,
Uh huh.
whatever.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
So that was actually that's a great way to learn. And then um, the husband of our conductor, our youth orchestra conductor, her husband is a composer and jazz pianist, and she came to our orchestra just the last 2 years that I was in high school, but she found out about my jazz playing, and she had a job, but her husband was kind of a moderately employed composer, basically staying at home while she went and did the orchestra stuff. And so he was my first kind of formal jazz teacher,
Okay.
and it's like, okay, here's a Charlie Parker omni book, here we're working on the Au Privat solo. Can you show me where the 2-5-1 changes are? Do you know what to play on a 2-5-1?
Mm-hmm.
You know that if you learn how to play this 2-5-1 and it's in the key of B flat, you could play, if you transpose that bit of melodic material, then you could play that on any 2-5-1 change in any key. And in
Mm-hmm.
fact, that's what I want you to do. That's your assignment this week, you know. So he
Mm-hmm.
was the first teacher that I ever had that did that. And so that's when I would say my real formal understanding of sort of the theoretical stuff started
Okay.
to happen. But then I left, and then I went to Chicago to do a classical violin degree. And then I was kind of, secretly pursuing my jazz passion while I was trying to make sure that I had my scales and my concerto and my etude
Mm-hmm.
ready for my lesson.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Awesome. And then you pursue your undergrad, and then what's about masters? You have a masters?
I don't.
You don't?
I have sort of a fraught relationship with school. That's just sort of I'm kind of involved with the way that things are now. But basically, my sophomore year in college, I was involved in a hit and run accident. I was on a bicycle and I got hit by a car,
Mm.
and I was injured really badly. But everything was on my leg. I could still play, but I had to drop out of school. I was in the hospital the first time for 3 weeks, and then over the course of the next 3 years, I had to go back and have surgeries, stuff like that, and I just couldn't start school again. But one of the things that I think really kept me alive is that my violin teacher was a gentleman named Myron Cartman, Dr. Myron Cartman. Um, he still continued to teach me and had me come to violin class even when my parents weren't paying any tuition, um, because I couldn't be in school. But he saw, I mean, I was only 19 years old, and you're still a teenager, even though you're, out in the world. And so
Mm-hmm.
you have
Mm-hmm.
these needs as a teenager. You have to, your peer group matters so much. And he saw that. And so as soon as I was well enough, at least to start coming back for lessons, even though I couldn't enroll in school, I was still taking violin lessons and going to class every week and playing in class. But I didn't. So basically, my undergrad took me 7 years,
7 years. Wow.
to finally get out. So I had 7 years of training. I had 7 years of training, but I only got an undergrad. But at least
Yeah.
I got out.
Yeah. Yeah. You get it. So okay, cool. But then, are you still teaching at new school?
I'm sorry.
Are you still teaching at new school? Because I think I saw that
Yeah,
you're cool. So
yeah, yeah.
what
I
I
mean, I'm an adjunct
okay,
at the new school. So
okay.
for those of you out there, yeah, I mean, if I were to want to get a more steady gig, which I'm sure everybody that I know that got that steady gig now is really happy they got that steady gig,
Yeah, yeah.
whereas I'm unemployed.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I mean, I taught at Temple University in Philadelphia for 5 years. Um, that's a great program. I was driving down there and teaching 1 day a week. Um, I teach adjunct at the new school,
Mm-hmm.
which basically means that if they have a student who's a violin player or anything, I guess, and they say, "Hey, I want to take lessons with a violin player," then they pull out the New York Rolodex of
Okay.
violin players, and my name's in there. And sometimes people take lessons with me. So
And
it's
but do you have like a big studio, or is usually like just few folks who want to take classes with you?
Yeah, it's usually one student at a time
Okay.
at the new school.
Okay.
In Philadelphia, I had a studio. It was never very big.
Mm-hmm.
Violin studios, especially in jazz, don't tend to be too big unless maybe you're at Berkeley or something like that.
Okay.
Um, Usually, the violin player is sort of the one odd duck in that year's mix.
Well, especially because it's quite challenging for a violin player to get into the jazz world, but we're gonna get there. Um, but you have a career, particularly I would say unique in a good way, because you have played with so many good cats out there. Um,
Mm.
and I was taking a look. I was listening through all your albums,
Mm.
and there were some few albums that stick out. And first of all, Aaron Goldberg and Phil Markowitz, like from the perspective of pianists, these two cats are like amazingly good.
Yeah,
I met Aaron Goldberg a few years ago here actually too. Um,
cool.
but um, but what can you tell me like from that experience with working with such a like great pianist, but totally different, you know?
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and then how that influenced your playing like so much, or maybe not. I don't know. You tell me.
yeah, definitely. It definitely did. And that's why I came to New York in the first place, was to seek that out. I think that that's why, I love Chicago, and I lived there for a long time after school. I mean, I lived in Chicago for 13 years. So my roots really, as a young adult in the beginning of my career, and all of my closest friends, and you know,
Hmm.
where that's really, Chicago. And so I have a lot of influences from that, but the type of jazz specifically that I was really being drawn to, um, was happening in New York. And when I showed up, I was playing with my friends, and I didn't go to school with Aaron Goldberg, and I didn't, go to Manhattan School and study with Phil. But yeah, the way that those two generations, I mean, basically, Aaron and I are the same generation, more or less.
Hmm.
And Phil is a generation of, he came to New York in the 1970s, and had this amazing honor of having one of his early tunes recorded by Bill Evans on an iconic record,
Yeah.
because he's super heavy, he's absolutely one of the heaviest cats ever. And I mean, to work with them, it's, yeah, it is a bit of a mental spread, for me. But I've learned so much from both of them in different ways. And when I first started playing with Phil, I came to him as a student. I can't, I still, I always, I continue studying always.
Hmm.
I'm always trying to take lessons with people. When I'm not taking lessons with people, I buy other people's online classes, and I buy people's PDF ebooks, or whatever. I'm constantly checking out stuff. And I was at a period of sort of confusion as to exactly what I wanted, what I was going to do. It was, it was maybe, yeah, right before I met Aaron, that it all kind of like happened at the same time. And I was trying to find a mentor that I could have multiple lessons with, and kind of help to organize my ideas, basically about how do I organize all of these disparate ideas about what you think about as a jazz improviser,
Hmm.
in melody, harmony, and rhythm, and then all of the, endless things that you can do in all of those categories. How do you decide to, what do you do? How do you get together a concept? Because I sort of felt like the way that I was doing it, which is definitely how I was doing it, is I was playing at a certain level, and then I would hear some new thing, and I think like, oh, that's cool, and I would try to figure out what that was.
Hmm.
But so there might be a long period of time where my brain is just being drawn to maybe rhythmic things, but maybe my harmonic sensibilities weren't developing because I was really hearing more rhythm,
Hmm.
and I sort of perceived this, um, I think, lack of a more holistic way of working on my craft and my art every day. That's what I was
Hmm.
looking for.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so that's how I met Phil. And then, we became friends through that. And that's how I met you.
Hmm.
And, I mean, it's just
Well,
crazy.
well, let me
Yeah,
let me add one more figure in there. That was because of Jake, my professor, who studied with him.
that's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
but yeah, uh, what you're saying is definitely right. Like, well, till I studied with Jake Herzog, for the ones who don't know him, is when I realized how structured you can be in your practice session, like every day. and that somehow like takes you somewhere else, and
Yeah.
for sure I could hear and see the relationship of Phil in between all of this, because
Yeah.
that's what it is. But then I also researched a little bit about your violin player again in relation to the classical playing. But then you release an album called Intersection,
Oh yeah.
jazz mid classical songs, um, and it's a 30 songs to this album, which is crazy. It's like when I saw it, I was like, man, 30 songs. That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
How did you came up with this idea, and how you develop? How long did it take, like, to record all those 30 songs? Because it's a quite giant album.
So we recorded all of those songs. I think over. I think it was over 2 days.
Wow.
Um, Pretty sure it was over 2 days. But that project. I mean, really, that project that's Patrice Michaels' project.
Okay.
Patrice Michaels is the singer, and the way that came about, um, it's kind of. I mean, it's sort of, yeah. This is a funny story to me.
Okay.
So somebody that I play with a lot over the years is my good friend Matt Euler, the composer, bassist in Chicago, and Patrice Michaels is this incredible singer, soprano, incredible musician. I can tell you stories about her. She's mind blowing. And so I was playing a concert at the radio. I mean, I guess it was on WBEZ, or it could have been on maybe the classical station in Chicago with one of Matt's things. So I was functioning as a jazz player, but it was one of those things where Matt maybe had other. He was working with a group called Eighth Blackbird, that's kind of a really well known. You know, they've got a bunch of Grammys, and they're incredible contemporary classical ensemble of different instrumentation, which is roughly off the bat. There's a person that doubles on violin and viola, a cellist who's a good friend of mine, percussionist, a pianist, a clarinet and reed player, and a flutist. I don't think I'm leaving anybody out. I think that's sort of the group. And so we were playing a concert. Patrice came up to me, and Patrice, loves jazz and has also done some jazz. And she asked me if I would be interested in, you know, working on this project with her. And so I just, I met her, and I knew some people that knew her, and I was thinking like, yeah, sounds great. Yeah, like I know that she's great already,
Uh-huh.
and of course, So I just assumed that what I was going to be required to do was, you know, get the stuff, check it out, learn a few melodies, get the changes together, go in and play some solos. I had no idea. And to be fair, I don't think that anybody had an idea except for, well, I know that me and Nick, the cellist, really know. So I got Eighth Blackbird's cellist involved in the project,
Hmm.
and he lives in Chicago. The group is based in Chicago, and uh, there were these commissions, and it's the hardest music that I will ever play, and all I can say is that even from what you would hear on the recording, you really have to see it to even rhythmically it is by far the most calculus like music that I've ever played in my life. And this is not something, I mean, my classical reading chops, especially at the time, compared to what they once were, which was never, like super, super high pro level, I guess. It was like, good student,
Hmm.
uh, professional. I mean, but not like, and this stuff was insane. And that record is that, and Patrice is an incredible, this stuff, for those of you that haven't heard it, is it really rides a line between some pretty avant-garde, but also some very melodious things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the first time I went to, this is the last story I'll just say about it, is when I went to Patrice's house for the first time. I came in and I was going to try to sight read through some of this stuff. Patrice was sitting at the piano, accompanying herself from the score and singing all the stuff.
She's one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. Like he was playing. I was like, what? Oh, and by the way, her mother-in-law. Guess who her mother-in-law is?
I have no idea.
Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg of the Supreme Court.
Oh, that's
She's
fun.
married to Ruth Bader Ginsburg's son, Jim Ginsburg, who is the guy that owns this really great classical label in Chicago called Sadie Records.
Well,
and a long story about
that.
Yeah,
no worries. That's great. And awesome. And then one of the more recent releases you got is the Wonderment. If that's the correct pronunciation. It's German, so I don't know much about German. With Matt Ullery and John Bademeyer. And one thing I could dig about your jazz albums, your rhythmic section, it's killer all the time, man. And I don't know, because I could figure out that like you have different people pretty much in all the albums. Is that a part of the transition that you have? Is that the people that you have available at the time, or how is that decision made most of the time?
It's sort of weird, actually. Yeah, jazz is really weird like that. Jazz is the most sort of polyamorous music that that I think that the career is strange. So Matt and John are my two of my closest friends back from my Chicago days, and Matt is that same composer that I was talking about, who I was playing with when I met Patrice. John Bademeyer was the second drummer in my first band. I met him the second year, I think it was, that I went to the Banff Center in Canada. And John, by the way, just so happens to be the first drummer that was ever in Snarky Puppy.
Oh.
When the band was called Snarky Puppy. Like he was going to school in Denton, and that's definitely how all this kind of comes together. When I was recording, when I was playing, and after I had done this an earlier trio record I did called The Magic Number, I was playing with Matt Wigton, who is also one of my closest friends, and I'd been playing with him since my first band. He's also from North Texas. It's weird, like I was up in Chicago, but I met these people through this thing called Betty Carter's Jazz Ahead, which is kind of one of those sort of collegiate and post-collegiate jazz, little scholarship jazz programs that you can do. And so how did the recordings happen? Well, so like the thing with Aaron Goldberg is that I got called by that the label owner, Jerry Teakins, who sadly we just lost him, not during this pandemic, but before. And Jerry Teakins has been doing this, independent small jazz label since I think 1980 or maybe even 1979, like late 70s, early 80s. And he called me out of the blue. I was actually touring with my trio, and I answered the phone in the car, and he was like, "You want to do a record?" And so he was offering to. First of all, I knew Crisscross Records was one of the reasons that I moved to New York in a weird way, because I was going to Tower Records in Chicago, and I was buying all these records from this label called Crisscross, because we knew them as it was like a label that made good sounding records that were basically like blowing sessions, or like less produced, where you could really hear what people were playing, and it had all the players that I was in love with musically, like Chris Potter, Dave Kukowski, Kurt Rosenwinkel, Mark Turner, you know, Bill Stewart, and I mean, basically, it was like the whole contemporary New York straight ahead jazz scene recording on labels and doing it in various bits, and they would play some standards. Some of the records would be all original material. So I really wanted to make a record, and I was super excited. And he was going to put up the money to do the record, but he didn't want to use my band. And I, I was kind of hurt by that, and I sort of didn't understand it, but I understand it now. I think that Harry really thought that the band and the trio was great, but he was barely making, he was just making enough money to barely be able to put out the next bunch of records.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was already taking a chance with putting a violin player out on this label. And he wanted to have some guys that the people that buy his records regularly would recognize.
Yeah.
From other sessions, and sort of put me with them.
Okay.
And so that's how those records came about. So that's how I met Aaron Goldberg, Matt Penman, Eric Harland, and Obed Calder. And I still play with those guys, and been jamming a little bit with Eric with Snarky Puppy, and Eric is on my new record that hasn't come out yet. Actually, Eric Harland. Other group currently with Matt Penman, the bass player, and with Clarence Penn, another great drummer. And we were. There were so many things that were going to be happening. And I'm sure that everybody.
Oh yeah. Cool. So we just went through your solo career, but at what point Snarky Puppy happened? That's the big question to the end kind of thing, because man, I mean, you know better than anyone else about the Snarky Puppies sound, how pretty much it represents like a new generation, a little bit before them, of the jazz, because we have all sort of stuff, but right now I think, like, especially after this pandemic, definitely we're gonna have something new. But I read the sound; it was part of that contemporary sound. But I would love to hear, like, how do you end up with them, and then we go for them.
Yeah. So it was just a really chance meeting, which is, I think, the way that Snarky Puppy became Snarky Puppy is the way that pretty much all other jazz bands, rock bands, pop bands, R&B bands that are small and under the radar happen. And it's actually been really interesting that I remember playing gigs with that band where we were bigger than the audience. Definitely. Everybody in the band almost can, remember a time like that. And so then, when the band becomes known, then all of a sudden, people are like, how'd you get into Snarky Puppy? How do you audition for Snarky Puppy? It's like, it's a bunch of friends. It's like friends playing with friends. Like that's how it came together, with Mike. It was not sort of a thing of like, okay, we got a moneymaker here, we're gonna have a show. So okay, let's get the crazy keyboard guys and let's get them like that. It's not like that. It's just like all people that knew each other. So it was even weirder with me because I, had been playing with John Diedemeyer, who's on that Wonderment CD, my newest CD actually. And this was right at the time that I was thinking about moving from Chicago to New York. I got an email from Mike Leake saying, "Hi, my name's Mike Leake. I got your email from John Diedemeyer, who's a really good friend of mine from school, and I have a band down here in Denton called Snarky Puppy, and we're trying to, um, tour more in the Midwest. And I've been leading, gigs with my own band. And would you mind, letting me know what some cool venues are? And I could definitely, give you some names of places down here. And also when we come through, we'd love to have you, I'd love to have you sit in with us and, it's whatever. And that's how it happened. Like we had a little email exchange, and then we had a phone conversation. And when when Mike came up, when they drove up to Chicago for the first time in the 12-passenger van, playing at Martyrs or something like that. I sat. Actually, he had me play with him and the drummer and one of the keyboard players to do a couple of my songs up front,
Mm-hmm.
and then just asked me to sit in uh, and play some solos on like one of the tunes or a couple of the tunes. And then I just kind of jumped in the van and went around the Midwest. We went to Kalamazoo, and we went to Milwaukee, and went to Detroit and Ann Arbor, and, just kind of around that area. So that's how I met Mike. Mike, then I moved to New York, and that also is right when I started playing with the bass player Stanley Clark. And then Mike sent me another email asking if I could lay down some string parts on Snarky's new record. It's called "Bring Us the Bright," and there was a quartet of some students that Mike had known, and I think his girlfriend at the time was a violinist, and he wanted me to come down and do some stuff with that, laying down some string parts, and then play some solos on the record. So that was the first Snarky record I played on, and then started occasionally doing more concerts. The way that it always worked was there was a core, just like there is a core of the band. And when Mike, because there wasn't enough money to bring everybody along all the time, it was really kind of more so and so would play when Mike was up on the East Coast. I remember
Okay.
when Snarky first started coming to New York, John Ellis was always playing saxophone with the band, with the other, with Chris Bullock. So yeah, anyway, that's how it all happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that was through an introduction to my good buddy John Deidemeyer, and I've been playing with him, on and off ever since. And not really ever off, but just kind of, that I played on that. So "Bring Us the Bright," and then "Tell Us Your Friends," which was, or "Tell Your Friends," "Tell Your Friends," which was, that was the record that we did live and put the whole thing up on YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And nobody had done that yet. And Mike worked closely with the filmmaker and an engineer to figure out how they could make the sound and the video be the absolute best that it could, and have the ability to be able to edit it and make it be really, really high, professional, without having a whole production. Because it was like, man, we did 2 takes of every song, and that was it. Like, that's what, that record is a live record. And then the one we did after that was ground up. And that was, at that point, that's when Mike had relocated to New York. And so did Chris Bullock and Mike Maher, Maz, and Bob Lanzetti, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
There was kind of a group of the guys that were still living in Denton that came up and moved to Brooklyn. And so then the band, instead of being like Denton and Dallas with various people joining in, then the band sort of became Brooklyn and Dallas, and then there was already, Bill Lawrence is over in London, England. There were a few
Mm-hmm.
people kind of around. Yeah,
Cool.
that's
Eh,
kind of that's it.
but that brings an interesting part of Snarky Puppy, which is the production side, which we can see. I mean, I guess at the beginning it was a little bit like improvised, but then when it became something, I don't want to say more important, but more serious might be the right word to use here. Then probably the production side of all of you, either for releasing a CD, for planning a tour, or for anything of that nature, I bet it's a little bit complex because so many people are involved in the ensemble. Could you talk to us like a little bit through that entire process?
Yeah. Well, I think that Mike League has always been the producer and the primary composer, although he's very open to other people bringing in their own stuff. But Mike ultimately, like even if someone else brings in their composition and they have ideas, it is it implied within that is here's my song, and Mike will then produce the song for the band because Mike is the guy that is brain of what the sound is with Snarky Puppy as a whole. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
the way that Mike has put it together, which is just incredible to me that he's figured out a way to do this, is that he lets all of us we have total freedom and to do whatever we want, like any kind of sound, um, anything. I mean, ultimately, when it comes to a recording, whether Mike's the composer of the song or if somebody else is, you know, there might be some discussions about, oh, this, okay, and then it's going to get like, real atmospheric here, maybe some stuff here, but actually not really. I mean, I would say that maybe in the past, maybe that happened a little bit more, but in the past 5 to 6 years, not at all. I think that everybody, um, Mike has the ability to have everybody be totally free with their thing and figure out how to take all these different parts and then meld them into the sound that he's going for with the band, you know. And so we do that, we do the performance, and then, we don't know what it sounds like until, we get the mix. And it's always exciting,
So
because they make us sound as good as we could possibly sound.
cool. So in that creative process, so does it mean that like there is an idea of a melody per se, and then you develop the things as a group, or do you think he's pretty strict about like the whole idea that he had from the beginning, and he stick to that?
So in this way, it functions a lot like sort of a contemporary straight ahead jazz group, which of course it doesn't sound like, but it's
Mm-hmm.
basically whoever's tune it is, that's the tune. Like that's what the melody is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Basically, we play the tune, but then the arranging of the tune um, is a little bit. It's actually a lot more open at the beginning. In fact, a lot of people don't know. Like we don't and never have really used sheet music in the band at all. Like not even like lead sheets or anything. The only time there was ever any lead sheets were when Mike was having a string quartet that I would be, working with besides doing solo stuff. There would have to be some written parts for a string part. There were string parts on Ground Up, for instance, and on Tell Your Friends. But nobody else in the band had any charts.
Okay.
And it's so the way that all this music comes together is that whoever the composer of the song is gets either an MP3, but almost always now it's usually a Logic sequence. And though I'll say, everybody has their own different ways that they do that. Some people get more specific about the sounds, and start,
Mm-hmm.
but mostly, like what Mike does is the first sequences that he sends are he only uses sounds that everybody has. Like you don't have to have any special sounds or filters. Like if you have the basic Logic pack,
Mm-hmm.
he only uses basic sounds. The other thing is most of the time the the melodies, like the counter melodies and bass lines and everything is done with just that generic Fender Rhodes patch. There's no it's like it's
It,
in that way what happens is it makes everybody have to learn every part because you're not totally
oh,
sure. You know, although at this point, obviously, and the horns. they're like, okay, the horns are going to get that, and they're already together. You know, they're already like off,
Mm-hmm.
splitting it into like 4-part harmonies, and what are we going to do in this? And Chris, you're going to play flute on this one, or Maz, you're playing flugel on this one, because Jay's going to play trumpet. You know, that all happens really fast. But anyway, back to what I was saying. We play the tune. The solo sections obviously are just completely improvised. Not only are the solo sections completely improvised, but nobody really knows who's going to solo on what at what point, almost really ever. That is definitely the case in our live shows. Like, you know, if I played a solo on a particular tune and we happen to be playing that live on tour, it's not going to be for a while before I get the look to play that solo. It's constant, you know. And he keeps it different every single night, and nobody knows. So you have to, you have to stay prepared, you know, to a certain extent. You have to really stay on your toes, even if you didn't play on that tune. And it's, it's very jazz-like in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like the best way to prepare for a Snarky Puppy gig or a recording session is to be prepared as a musician, because chances are you're going to have to like sort of do it, right away on the, immediately.
For you as a violin player, since you integrate some effects into your sound, right? Sometimes I don't know, you use that all the time. Does it mean that you have like we are getting a little bit more specific now? But do you have like a specific patch for soloing, or how do you run that in your?
That's a good question. I mean, they're all good questions, but that's,
Uh-huh.
I've for I actually, as my things have become, have gotten more complex over the years, I did almost invest in one of those MIDI switchers, because I was like, yeah, that would be so great because I could do that. But the thing that I've realized about myself is that I like to tinker in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And the pedals here, I can actually show you guys. Um, this is on my floor right now. Can I flip this
Yeah,
around?
you can
Yeah.
flip it. There you go. There you go.
This is like my current touring board right now.
Oh, those 7 times.
And so I've got two of these. I mean, you really only need one of these to have an entire effects unit, basically.
Do you go stereo?
I don't go stereo because there's so many stereo signals coming through the mix of Snarky Puppy. It's like it's kind of better for me and for everybody else to just deal with a single sound source. Although I do, someday I'm gonna have this all tricked out.
Mm-hmm,
But yeah, so basically, this is my wireless. This is my preamp, which is kind of the most important thing for me to like really fine tune the tone, just the absolute clean signal.
mm-hmm.
These are amazing. In fact, check this out. They have this really complex. Well, it's not complex, but it's just everything that you would really need to do with that signal to have it kind of back to that, right? Newest part of my board is this thing, which I'm still just kind of.
Oh, that's just yeah.
Those things it's crazy.
It's part of the Helix family, right?
Yeah, it's a very high learning curve, and I don't really need it for sounds, except the sounds are great. So I'm super glad. Wow, my stuff is super dusty, man. This is disgusting. But the one thing that this can do that these can't do is this can run impulse responses. And I started messing around with impulse responses for acoustic violin. So I have some stuff in here where, like, if I'm playing some of the tunes where I want to have more of an acoustic sound, I can activate that impulse response, and that's going out to the house, and that's great. This distortion pedal is the one that was designed by none other than Mark Lettieri. This is I think for a violin player, I've never found a distortion and overdrive pedal that is more perfect for a violin because it has this very powerful and awesome graphic EQ that really, 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 really changes the sound. And I mean, you can use this for full out, just screaming, shredding metal, or I love using it just on a jazz gig just to get kind of like a slightly overdriven amp sound, just kind of like a more sort of tube-like sound. Then in this one, the reason I have two of these is I have all my harmonies and also digital distortions and modulations and stuff in here. Wah-wah pedal, little mini wah. And then this is all of my spaces, reverbs, delays, outer space sounds. So I like to have them divided like that. As you know, see, this one's Sam, and that one's Dave.
Okay.
So that's Sam and Dave.
Could,
And then they all run back. Everything runs back into here.
okay.
So that then the sound engineer only has to just take this out right there, and everything here I've already mixed exactly the way that I want it to sound, and then that just goes out. So, it makes their job easier, and I'm happier because I know what it's supposed to sound like.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
And how you got into the amp modeling for your violin, like the helix and all that, or the Kemper, or
I'm not even using it for I'm not really using the helix for amp model.
okay.
The only thing I'm just using it for is I really do like the effect sounds on there, and obviously the effect sounds on the Eventide are amazing too. Sometimes they're the ones that you get in the first patch on the Eventide might not be exactly what you're going for. You can get there, but it's really complex. You have to really understand how that stuff works. Some of the stuff I've noticed right out of the box on the Line 6, like the vintage phasers, that's really big for me because I'm a huge Jean-Luc fan.
Oh yeah.
And there's just something about the way that a phaser works on a violin that is different than the way that it works on the guitar or anything else, because when you play the violin, you're activating the phaser continuously instead of having there be an attack and then the phaser does the thing. And it just has a thing that for me, if I'm going for an electric sound, it's not like I'm trying to sound like Jean-Luc, although that's never a bad thing. I want to sound a little bit like Jean-Luc.
Not all the time, but a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Not all the time, just a little bit. But yeah, man. So for instance, I started actually on the last Snarky Puppy tour when I got this HX Stomp. Besides the acoustic modeling stuff, the impulse responses I was doing on there, is that I started using the phaser from that, but I'm using the harmonizers and stuff from the Eventide.
Okay.
Crazy.
Cool. Bananas. And did you start with effects since the beginning, or it was a Snarky Puppy thing? Like,
oh no, I've been playing with effects long before that. Yeah,
okay.
For sure. I even when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, while I was still playing classical violin, playing in orchestra and doing that, I started playing guitar. And actually, the first effects I ever messed around with, I had a mandolin that a friend of the family had made, and he let me play it. And we had this little Barkusberry. I don't even know if these are definitely, I don't know if you even see these anymore. It's about the size of the last joint on your pinky finger. And it was like brown wood colored thing, but it was basically a little piezo transducer was in this thing, really tiny. And you would have to put putty on it, and then you would stick it on the front of the instrument, but then you would have a pickup. So there was a pickup on this thing, and the company Ibanez made this really weird thing, and it's called. Anybody out there that wants to look this up, you can find it. It's called the. I think I'm almost sure it's Ibanez. If it's not Ibanez, anyway, it's called the Hot Wad. And they made it. This was back when Walkmans were like a thing.
Yeah.
Like every teenager wanted to have a Walkman, you know, you walk around with your headphones. So they made this thing the same size and shape of a Walkman, and it even had a belt clip on it. So it took a 9-volt battery, and you could plug in your guitar. The idea was it was a guitar practicing amp. It was like the first belt, but it wasn't just a practicing amp because it had 2 effects. It had 3 effects. It had reverb,
distortion.
It had distortion, and it had chorus. That's it. And there were just buttons. Like you couldn't. There was no tweaking. It was just like on, distortion, on.
Yeah.
You know.
There is no EQ, no EQ, no nothing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. And you know, and so I remember getting so into that. And going out of my front yard with my little, you know, foam headphone things with the wire thing that goes over your head, like real crappy, cheap headphones, and playing the mandolin. And so I was already starting to get into guitar because I was really into Jimi Hendrix. But I discovered in the mandolin, all the notes are exactly the same as the violin. So I could basically, because I had been learning how to pick on the guitar, it's like, but I still didn't really know where the notes were so much. Now it was a slower exploration for me. But then I was like, okay, the picking, I'm not intimidated by that anymore. And like, ooh, I can play this little Bach piece on the mandolin because it's the same notes, except I don't have to worry about if they're in or out of tune. There's frets, yay!
Yeah.
You know, messing around with that. That was the first effect. So I was like 14 probably. And then my second record that I ever did, the first record I ever did under my own name was called Zach Broch and the Coffee Achievers, and that was more of sort of a straight ahead, in my mind, you know, these were my friends that I met at the Betty Carter Jazz Ahead thing, plus a drummer that I knew in Chicago, and that was more of a thing that I still do to this day, which is a mic and a mic'd amplifier and kind of blending the sounds. But I was kind of going for this sound that was somewhere. It was kind of like imagining if Jim Hall or John Scofield maybe played the violin. You know, kind of like one of their cleaner sounds, not like a distorted Sco sound. That's what I was going for, I think. And but the second record I made with the Coffee Achievers is called Chemistry, and the first song on that record is me playing through a Big Muff distortion pedal.
Big Muff.
And,
wow.
You know, I just, you know, and a wah, a Big Muff and a wah. And, you know, you know, and I'd actually already done another recording I did a recording with a band in Louisville called Lawoo. And they were the first guys that got me in the studio because I had a pickup now on my violin. And they were like, yeah, you ever tried going through a Big Muff, you know, whatever, you know, and so that's, you know, that was just kind of a continuation of my guitar days. So I've been playing with effects a lot.
I love it. Cool. And I kind of want to go now into the professional side, like more specific questions related to the music industry versus music journey, you know, and how do you have like phrase that, because we already heard like you start as a classical violinist, then you go to jazz, then you teach, and you also have a family, and that kind of is a lot. And at the same time, it leads to another question: how you keep a balance between those different universes.
It's really, really difficult, and it's been kind of my lifelong work, you know, or at least since my adulthood, in trying to answer that question. How do I make this balance? I don't think that there's ever a balance. but there is something, actually, I think I read this in a book called The One Thing or something like that, um, about, well, it's about all kinds of stuff, but I think that it's more a question of balance and counterbalance. So when you have to, you know, if you're an independent artist and you're gonna, you have a tour coming up and you've got a new record that just came out and you're trying to update your website with all of the new photos and graphics and getting the sound on your website and stuff like that, then you're gonna have like a week of everything being skewed towards having to work on your website. You know, that is going to take away energy and concentration from, you're not going to be having, probably you shouldn't be trying to be having your deepest musical revelations. That's not a week that is gonna jive very well if you're trying to quiet your mind and write some new music. It's taken me a really long time to sort of see that it's not like you get a perfect amount of everything working every day, but you get quicker at the counterbalancing stuff, so that you're aware that you're working intensely in this one thing, and then you know what to switch. Now, that's not to say that you don't play your instruments, you don't work on your music. I think it's really important that every musician has some sort of a core thing that they work on to develop their art and their craft that they can do every day, no matter if they're on the road or if they're on Christmas vacation, or if the kids are out of school and you have no privacy at home, like now forever, and stuff like that. So that's also been a big thing for me to try to answer that question for myself. How do you do that? How do you, how do you decide what your musical values are, so that you can boil them down to an essential thing that is the minimum thing that you require, not the maximum of what you would actually practice, but what's the minimum that I need to have so that I can feel like my spirit and my mind is together, so that I feel, because if you don't do that and you go on a week on a website building binge, you might learn a whole lot about website stuff and be fascinated by that for a few days. But for me, when it gets out of sync with the music and the art, I start to feel horrible. And I'm sure that a lot of people can, relate to that. That's a hard thing, man. And self-managing and all of that stuff. I don't know. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, definitely. And but the industry side of it, like, how long, like how far away you try to plan stuff. Like, I know right now that's out of the table, the planning on
Yeah.
the current circumstances. But before COVID, how was the planning for you? You gotta be way ahead because of Snarky Puppy, or how was it?
The past few years of my life, my schedule has been getting more ahead. And I think at first I was nervous about that, because I feel like, then maybe you're kind of locked in. Like, man, you saying yes to a gig that's a year and a half away. Like, what if you don't feel like doing it?
Yeah.
But certainly with Snarky Puppy, that's never been a problem. And I crave that now. I love that because, not just because it obviously takes some worries off of your mind, even if the gig doesn't happen, even if you're not worrying about it, it takes it off your mind. Now, it's like I was never the person that I didn't have, or, I've been working on a record for a long time now, still haven't gotten it done. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I've never historically been one of those music and life valedictorian type people that, you know, has all their stuff together. And that's something that I've always, you know, been working on or trying to figure out why I don't do that, and, you know, what is it, how do I really want to show up in this world of music. But, you know, now I think that you know, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and even try to speculate. You know, it's all we hear on the radio and on TV and on the internet every single day now. Right now, is everybody speculating as to when things are ever going to be remotely like they were before, if they ever will, if it's going to be just a little bit, if it's going to be a lot, if it's going to be this, but now this is going to be over here. It's like, you know, I don't, certainly, you know, nobody should listen to me say anything about that because I have no idea.
I mean, to be,
but,
sorry.
But with music though, there's this one thing that has been really important or special, at least to me, in this time. And this has been, it's horrible. You know, it's just horrible. It's like I really don't even want to like smile or joke about it because it's just horrible. You know, I'm just doing that to diffuse the tension that I feel here talking about it. But because of everything slowing down and stopping essentially and being very uncertain, for me, it's made me, as I'm sure a lot of people out there, you know, really, it's given me the time to look deeply within some of these things that I've been trying to understand and figure out and tweak for a long time. But in the course of the way that life was before, I just never had quite enough time. I never had quite enough stillness or silence to get there. And not just from the outside world, but I would be the one that would not stay in that place. You know, I would get on to something else, you know, some other interest, or like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I'm going to go work on that new record, or I'm going out on the road, so I'm not going to think about this stuff. So I think that now is the perfect time for a musician and an artist to really ask, you know, ourselves if we are like, what are our values? What are our values as a, you know, not just, you know, what do we want to be, but I even mean this in like an industry sense, in a career sense. It's like, you know, are your values in line with what you think you need your career to be? It's a perfect time to think about that, you know? You know, and even what does that mean? What is that? What does that mean? Like, to be, how do you even articulate what your musical values are? You know, and have you ever done it for yourself? And have you ever then had to sit down and explain it to someone else, you know, to be able to actually communicate it? And I think that getting really clear about some of those things, about why we even do what we do, and then ask yourself, okay, well, how close am I, you know, let's say pre-pandemic, to where that is? It could be something that's just like an outlier. To ask yourself if, when this is all over, although it's not going to be over like that, but now that you have that kind of clarity about your values and what really drives you for your love of music and your passion for what you do, are you willing to now just jump back into that other thing that negates part of your values? Or are you going to insist that coming back into whatever the world is going to look like as people start going back to work and we start, you know, getting out of our houses, is it going to look, you know, like what you figured out?
Yeah. I mean, you brought on a specific topic that I was hoping to get somewhere in the conversation, but somehow it came up earlier. And it's great. And honestly, the uncertainties that we all have now, even more than before. I mean, you have a pretty settled career with Snarky Puppy, but for a lot of people to get that settled career, it takes a few years, or actually sometimes they never get there. And
Yeah.
but at the same time, that the current circumstances could change everything, could change the meaning of being a tour musician, could change the meaning of us trying to express ourselves out there. and uh,
Yeah.
and that definitely reveals what great person Zach is, because I bet there are a lot of musicians just thinking like, man, when am I gonna get to make money again? But
Yeah.
there are some other great people like you who are thinking like a little bit deeper and more profound per se behind all of this, and this is for me is important, and clearly for you also is important, and honestly that's one of the reasons why I decided to do this, because I knew once we are like a lot of people just sitting at home trying to figure out what's happening with life, but at the same time there is a lot of wisdom that is not being put out there. We just see
Mm.
the product by itself, but we don't know what is behind, and that's important most of the time. And in that realm, is it for you important to give to the society in terms of developing music works, music projects for low income students or stuff like that? Have you done something like that, or what do you think about those kind of stuff?
About specifically about developing
Yeah, like
music that's more accessible to
yeah, yeah,
everybody.
yeah. Well, music too, and also education, because as you told earlier, like you have someone who believed in you at some point and who pushed you to be where you are right now, and you are clearly thankful about that,
Yeah.
and that shows the evidence of the importance behind education, but particular music education. You know.
Absolutely. Man, I think the reason that I wanted, the reason that I want to play music and continue to play music is that I've never experienced anything else in my life that I feel like has amplified all of the most profound and most beautiful connected things that happen in life for me. And I know that, and some people get that in other ways, but there's these things where, we reach for these moments of things that don't just take us away from where we are, but also enhance our connections with the human race
Hmm.
and other people and the world that we live in, nature and things like that. And um, you know, that's that's why I think music is important, because I think that music does that more. I think it does it more powerfully, more efficiently, and in a more lasting way than really almost anything.
Hmm.
You know, it's not to say that somebody can't have a profound life experience looking at, say, a great painting, but you can't put that painting on your phone and take it around and bring yourself back into that state with the headphones that came with your phone.
Hmm.
You have to be in the museum to see that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and so for this reason, I think that music is incredibly important. Uh, I mean, for just I could go on and on and on. And so therefore, I think that it's music makes the world better. You know, music makes the world better. I think that it brings people into a experience with humanity where the best things in our humanity, cooperation, empathy, um, sympathy, uh, all the pathies,
Yeah.
the good ones, not the
Mhm.
bad ones.
No violence.
Uh, yeah, are sort of happening. And so, do we need to have more music education for this? Sorry, I'm talking all over the place, but here's something that's always really gotten me about the United States, for instance, is that, I remember when schools had band and orchestra programs, you know, and I remember when private music lessons, if you had private music lessons, didn't cost $100 a lesson, you know. I mean, my mom is a private voice teacher, a soprano, and I think that when I was in college, she was still charging $15 for an hour a lesson, you know,
Yeah.
and she's a person that has a master's degree in classical voice, you know. I mean, obviously, different time,
Different times.
but
Yeah.
accessible. The point is, accessible. And the United States then started, the politicians started, taking the money away and putting it in other things. And then the people, and to me, this is just, something that says something about how sick our society is that they money back into the school for just a little bit of music education, not nearly as much as they used to have, but just a little bit, is that they had to start to convince people in the United States that music was important because your kids will get better scores at math and science, and it starts to become about this. Well, that's great, but it's not profound,
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
to me, it's a very cynical way of looking at something that can be something that can make the music, that can make the world so much, can make the human race function in so much more of a, cooperative, better, empathetic, humane way. And it's like, they're introducing it back into the school system because, well, yeah, we don't really have enough money for music, but, your kids will probably get, if they take a little bit of band class, they'll get better scores in, algebra
Mm-hmm.
too. Anyway, it's messed up. It's messed up. Anyway, that's a rant. But so music education is super important,
Mm-hmm.
But if it doesn't happen within an institution, it can still, it happens, what you really need to have to become a professional musician is you need to have a mentor. And you don't have to have, have, that mentor could be your father, it could be your uncle, it could be your grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
it could be your neighbor down the street, you know um, so if it's not going to work within the systems of education, it's going to be somewhere else. So let's hope that we, as working professional musicians, as we're scurrying around trying to, uh, you know, scrape together our ways of living, that we remember also that we didn't get into music just to make a living. I hope.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody gets into music just to make a living, that, come on. I mean, that's like one of the, then you've got bigger problems.
Um,
I mean, seriously, like,
yeah.
if you decide to become an artist, or even not an artist, let's just say you don't even want to be an artist, you just want to be like, a great, like, wedding band bass player, and like that's your thing. You just don't want to think too much about it. You just want to learn the songs and just like, there's so many easier ways of making a living.
Yeah.
So I just hope that if somebody out there is watching this and you're thinking that you have to justify your life in music because, because it's how you're going to get money, I don't think it's probably one of
Yeah.
the hardest ways that you can do it.
Yeah.
But you can make money doing it, and you can also do something that, I think truly makes the world a better. Maybe it doesn't make the world a better place because the world is the way that the world is. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it makes it more meaningful in a positive way.
Yeah. Yeah. Got you. Um, wow. Precisely, actually, last week when I was talking with I guess classical guitarist from Cuba, and he kind of touched that topic in the sense like like he was explaining like how when he goes into on stage, if he plays something and he don't see the reaction on people's faces, the performance didn't mean a thing, you know, because it's about how you communicate your feelings through that music, and I don't think like we are surrounded by so many good schools, but I don't think that a lot of them are teaching how to connect to that basic human nature that you just talked about, which is profound, you know.
Yeah.
As a guitarist, I have to ask you most question in sense of working with Mark,
Yeah.
because he's a reference for a lot of us, and I didn't want to like miss that question because I know a lot of people will hate me later on, and I would love to hear because I'm seeing him. I haven't met him yet, and but I know that he's such a cool guy, and I'm wondering how is that to work with him, and also in the process of composing new tunes, if he usually brings tunes to the table and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, definitely, Mark. Um, I mean, there's definitely a tune of Mark's on Culture Vulture.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and is there one on the new one? I'm having a brain fart right now, but possibly. Yeah. I mean, he's a the guy he's a valedictorian. Let's put it that way. You know, he is a great person. He's a great guitarist. He's very together. Um, you know, he didn't get a lot of people don't know this. He didn't get a music degree. He got a degree in like
Was it marketing?
advertising and
Yeah,
like
yeah,
marketing.
yeah.
Yeah. Which is, really interesting. It's, he's really good at it. It makes a lot of sense. He's very thoughtful, very shrewd, obviously incredibly talented, and he has a gift for just communicating with his instrument. Um, he is a very self-deprecating person. You
Mm.
know, he's the first person to kind of put himself down about something, but always kind of does it with a little bit of a smile. Um, he's funny. I think I already said that, but he's a very funny, quick-witted dude, and a kind person,
Is
and
he?
definitely approachable. So if somebody out there, if you dig his playing and you see him out playing with his band or with Snarky Puppy or Erica Baidu or whoever he's playing with, go say hi.
Yeah.
Go talk to him. Man. Go ask him for a lesson or tell him to give you some free guitar picks or something. He'll do it.
Is he the only one who still live down in Texas?
No, Chris McQueen does too.
Okay. Okay.
McQueen lives in Austin. He doesn't live in Denton. Yeah, I don't think any of those guys live in Denton anymore.
Okay, so they both live in Austin.
No, Mark is in Fort Worth, Dallas
In
Fort
Fort
Worth area.
Yeah, that's
Fort Worth.
yeah.
And McQueen's down in Austin.
Okay,
and
cool.
Lanzetti's in Brooklyn.
Well, I think that we cover a lot of stuff, man, and we can go for hours, I think, but definitely I don't want to take more of your time. So thank you so much, Zach,
Thank you, Gustavo.
for this great chat today. I'm glad that I have you here, not because of your name, but because of what great human being you are, you know. And I really appreciate that, and I'm glad that we can put out all of this and people can hear because I mean it's important all what you have said, but also I don't think a lot of times uh, they hear from the right people. You know what I mean? And it's good to have someone like you with a quite established career coming back to the roots, you know, and that was touching for me, and that was important for me, and I'm glad that we get to put that out there so kids and everyone get inspired.
Thank you for letting me talk about it and for talking with me about it. And I appreciate that because hey, who am I going to talk to about that? My kids? They don't want to hear me talk about that. They want to play Pokemon.
Yeah, I know. Uh, Well, thank you so much. I'm gonna close the live stream right now, and then I just talk to you in a second.
All right.
All right. Bye. See you all.
Bye, everybody.